There's something particularly humiliating in being given a prize of always coming last or always doing worst. I don't know where curling came from, but it certainly makes my lips curl at the thought of an Olympic winter sport that looks like women mopping a floor quickly. Did any other country enter this category of winter sport? Other than the Western nations? I don't know. I don't even want to look it up, really. When Britain staged the Paralympics, Britain had the most contestants winning gold medals in it. I believe. Is this something you want to be known for? Well, not me, anyway. Other national humiliations would be, well, Britain working against European interests in trying to start a war in the Ukraine to please his American masters. I mean, Boris, of course, I think about as recently as last week, everyone thought he was going to be replaced by some Asian member of his cabinet. In fact, I went so far as to say Britain probably wasn't ready to have its first Asian prime minister. But now it's all been forgotten about because of the pro-American warmongering that Boris has been doing on behalf of the Americans. He is playing his role as the poodle of America. This would endanger European energy security, but he doesn't seem to care about that. I've always said that, well, it should be obvious. It should be obvious that every nation state has its own unique geopolitical interests and ought to make the most of its geographical location. Sometimes their geographical location is its own tragedy. But Britain, being an island state, at one time fulfilled its purpose by becoming a global empire, but then it threw it away in two reckless gambles in 2 world wars. Perhaps it's only typical of Europe or European nations whose history has been mired by war over the drop of a hat. It could be said that Europe is always fighting because it's different European nations with their different languages and religions are primed to fight each other. And therefore the European Union was therefore a beacon of hope after 2 fratricidal European wars. They thought to themselves, never again. I know I have been against the European Union But I do not reject the idea in its on principle, because I do see that Europe as a whole has its own distinct geopolitical European interests. And part of Europe is Russia. Any sensible individual would want to cultivate good relations with its neighbours. And this is analogous to, well, this is the same for individuals as well as nations. Really, we should think of nations as individuals with a particular history. That would make the history of a particular nation more understandable and more relatable. And so it is a matter of, well, national embarrassment, if not national humiliation, to be treated badly by other nations. And if we are treated badly, do we ignore it or complain about it? This is always a difficult question, even for individuals. If we ignore it, it means we don't acknowledge it. But if we don't acknowledge it, does it mean that we don't know about it, or does it mean we and would not knowing about it be better than complaining about it? It's a hard call. It all depends. I suppose what would be worse is to know that you have been humiliated and you are too afraid to complain, and therefore you remain silent and in denial about what has been obviously an incident that would be noticed by your neighbours and your associates. There's a certain lack of self-examination. It's because of the censorship of the media. Nobody ever seems to be talking about things that really matter. You listen to reports and you wonder what it's all about, because it doesn't seem to be about anything at all other than for the purpose of filling airtime. You read posts of other people and it doesn't really seem to be about anything, merely a kind of event that says, listen to me tell you things, give me your attention, because it gives me comfort that you are giving me your attention. But really, the situation should be judged in the following way, in my view. And it is a theological point, I suppose. I know that Jews and Muslims regard themselves as the slaves of God. They acknowledge this. Well, they did before, and now they say something else. They dilute this principle. And of course, atheists do not think of themselves in this way at all. They would be offended. They would be disgusted at the idea. And I've asked myself, if God exists, then I suppose we would be the slaves of God, and therefore it is better to acknowledge this status rather than to not be aware of it. So, and by extension, I suppose if we are being slighted, being badly treated, being discriminated against, we should at least inwardly acknowledge that this is what is in fact happening and do something about it rather than deny it's happening. Well, perhaps it's face saving to pretend that some abusive or insulting incident has not happened. But to not be aware, to not really acknowledge it oneself is even more humiliating than to acknowledge it, in my view. So to get the gold medal for always doing worst, to always get the consolation prize is, well, a national humiliation, isn't it? And it's not just sport. In sport that the British are doing badly, perhaps they never train, perhaps they are physically degenerate as well as intellectually and morally degenerate. I don't know. I suppose it would spread to sport if you are already suffering from moral degeneracy and intellectual corruption. You wouldn't be able to put in the proper training programs to train your sportsmen properly. If the British football team, if the England team is never any good, one ought to wonder why. Is it because the intake is not so good? And why is the intake not so good? Is it because fewer working class boys have parents who care about them enough to take them to football practice? And that has a knock-on effect on the quality of the England football team. And if not enough sporting talent is being cultivated, then that would perfectly explain why Britain always gets the consolation prize in the Winter Olympics, which is that of curling. And it is a particularly undignified sport to be good at, in my view, because it's really, it really looks like somebody mopping the floor quickly. Very sad. And perhaps not the last kind of sad event that is to afflict this country whose people are in denial about the nature of their predicament.